podcast fam. Thank you so much for joining us. This episode is really special. We collaborated with the Prosecutors podcast, and we can't wait to share our conversation with them. So get your drinks and let's dive in. Cheers.
I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. Welcome back to the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. I'm your host, Alice, and I'm joined, as always, by my frisky co-host, Brett.
Oh, yeah, Alice. I'm feeling frisky tonight, let me tell you.
Okay. Tone it down. If y'all can't hear, there's some giggles in the background because we are brought to you by our frisky guests, Kayla and Addie from Drinks with Defenders. And you can't have Drinks with Defenders without drinks. Welcome to the show, you guys. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having us.
It is such a pleasure.
Well, before we get started on the important stuff, it's a pleasure for us. Please explain to us what a frisky is.
Ooh, good question. Kayla, I'm going to take the lead on this as it was my recommendation.
Absolutely.
We chose this drink. So if you come hang out with us on Drinks with Defenders, we try to have something fun to drink. We don't care if it's with alcohol or whatever you want to drink. We try to have something fun each time. Kind of a bit about Kayla and I. We went to law school together. Kind of our concept is sometimes it's just nice to sit and have a drink and talk legal stuff. And that's a big part of our friendship. It's a big part of what we do on our podcast. So tonight's drink is a drink from my hometown. I'm from Salt Lake City. A big summer drink is to mix Frisky and whiskey. And we thought it would be kind of a good thing to share with our new friends on the Prosecutors podcast. So drinks are kind of on my hometown tonight. And if you want to drink alongside us, that is what we're drinking.
Only 2 ingredients required.
I love that. You know what? We are all about simplicity these days because, guys, we are so excited to have our guests with us. They are our counterparts in court. As their title can probably tell you, they are also attorneys, but they are defense attorneys. And we are so excited to have some great conversation with you guys today. Thanks for that kind of intro about who you are. If you guys haven't listened to Drinks with Defenders, make sure you check them out. They are wherever you find podcasts. You will feel like you're drinking with some of your friends. That's how I felt when I listened to you guys. But with going to law school together and, you know, you guys still work full time, you still go to trial and you are doing podcasts. Brett, who does that? Why would anyone work full time like that?
I was going to say.
I think that's so awesome. And it's so wonderful. And obviously is what gives you fodder to have such good conversation on your podcast. But, you know, give our audience a little bit of a taste of what drove you to first, you know, become defense attorneys. And then also what led you to make it into a podcast while still going to trial, you know, and going to court every day and balancing or not balancing, in my case, the stresses of both podcasting and lawyering.
Kayla, you take the lead on this one. I feel like our podcast is kind of your brain baby. So take the lead, girl.
Well, goodness. I guess taking things one step at a time here. First of all, I think you're doing a fabulous job balancing everything. You're a rock star, Alice. Let's see. I always wanted to be involved in the criminal justice system. Growing up, I watched a lot of like America's Most Wanted and Cops with my dad. And actually one of like my earliest memories of telling somebody what I wanted to be when I grow up was a prosecuting attorney. So that's fun.
What went horribly wrong?
You know,
We came to our senses.
I just think there's something so cool about like fighting for the underdog. You know, I've always really, what's the word? Identified, I guess, with the underdog. And so I like that it's scrappy. I also feel like there's a lot of creativity in defense work, which I like. You know, I find that when I'm preparing for trial and stuff, it's not so much that I'm thinking super hard about what questions I want to ask or what my opening statement is. It's more like, what is the theme? Like, what is the idea here? I love that part of it. Addie and I were and remain best friends. We met in, what was it, Addie? Was it legal ethics?
No, we met in our first year criminal law. And I sat next to you and you asked me if I liked murder. And we've been friends ever since. And
as all good friendships start.
Yeah,
she was.
I sat next to her. I had all of these classes with her, and she would chime in. And I just thought that she just seemed to be one of those people in law school that didn't absolutely drive me crazy. And so I wanted to be friends with her. And I went and sat next to her first day of second semester, and she just looked at me and she was like, "Do you like murder?" And I remember thinking, what a strange question, but like, okay, I'm going to run with it. There's a chance for this to be like a cool friendship. And I looked at her and I said, "Yeah, I love it. What about you?" And she was like, "Who's your favorite serial killer?" And we've been friends ever since. Man. And now we're both defense attorneys. She brought me a book to our next class, which was The Stranger Beside Me. We mentioned that briefly. And
I know you're a fan, Brett. All you mentioning that.
And we've been friends ever since. And now we've tried to work on a podcast in law school. We had some things that we wanted to talk about in terms of just the experience of law school and how strange it is to just be a person who chooses to do that, and all of the stress that it kind of brought to our lives and our perspectives from our lives. And then we just decided we didn't have time for it. And then in practice, we were like, hey, let's go back to that drawing board, that project we wanted to do. Let's do it. And maybe people will listen to something we have to say because we're defense attorneys now and we're actually doing the thing. So we wanted a concept that kind of felt like how our conversations were in law school, how our conversations are when we catch up over like long phone calls after we go to trial, something like that. And just talking about things that we find interesting. And, I think in my listening of the Prosecutors podcast, I really appreciate the fact that the two of you are such good friends, or so it seems on your podcast, as colleagues on the other side of.
Sorry, I love the "so it seems." That is such a lawyerly thing to say.
Or so it seems. I never want to speak for you guys.
Brett is always on thin ice over here. I think everybody knows that.
But you know what I mean? Like sometimes you have work colleagues that are just brilliant attorneys that you have a different friendship with, that is like, oh, you work together, but you see each other so much and you work on just so much stuff together that you're just colleagues. It's really cool, the friendship that you have. Kayla and I don't work in the same office currently. We practice in the same area. I practice in a different state, but we, are friends from law school, and now we just have similar career trajectories, and it's nice to still have that warmth. And it's cool that the two of you have found that in practice. I'm really impressed by that. So I've really enjoyed listening to your podcast. It makes me feel kind of like our friendship, although it's like us maybe if we were more refined. Kayla, I'm sorry that you throw us under the bus that way.
I actually thought you were going to say if we were a lot older and more tired.
I was just going to say, one of the things I enjoy about your show is hearing you guys talk about being lawyers, and y'all are relatively new, I think. Yeah. And hearing you talk about things like standing up in court for the first time, and you're talking to the judge, and the judge can't hear you, and sort of those stresses. That's a lot of fun to hear as well.
And I love that honesty, because, we're all people, but we can't kind of give into those flubs while they happen, but they happen just like in any other profession. And I love your realness about it, because lawyers are real people. And that's good to keep in mind when we criticize the attorneys we see on TV in the cases that we follow. But kind of diving into that a little, I know you guys are in different offices. People may not know, prosecutors is a little bit easy. You work usually for like a jurisdiction, right? But defense attorneys kind of come in multiple shapes and sizes. There's obviously public defenders, which there's federal, but there's also like state and local types of defenders. There's privately acquired. And then there's, of course, like appointments, even if you're in the private, quote unquote, sector where people retain you. Can you guys give people a little bit of background about what type of defense attorney you are and what kind of cases that you've been been able to work on?
So Kayla, I'll start first. I'm a public defender. I work for a county. So typically I work misdemeanor cases. So people in magistrate court in the state that I work in, that's our lower level court. So adult misdemeanors, I do juvenile felonies and juvenile misdemeanors. I can second chair on some felonies. I actually just handled my first solo sentencing in district court this past week, which was very scary. So to the commentary that you just provided about those scary moments, I found out that I was going to be flying solo on my way to the courthouse. I wanted to puke. I made it through it. It was fine. But I also get to represent people in some limited civil proceedings, such as involuntary commitments for hospitalization proceedings, as well as child protection cases. So I have a true mixed bag, which is something I love about public defense. I think it's either for you or not for you in terms of if you're somebody who's looking into practicing law. Public defense, I think it's a little bit of a rough reputation, but something that I love about it is it's a mixed bag. And I love the concept of my job where justice is truly blind. I don't get to pick my client. They don't get to pick me. And we're just kind of riding through the wave of let's handle your case and let's figure it out. I love that. I love the underdog mentality that Kayla said. And yeah, public defense is surely not for the faint of heart if you want something scrappy. And I love it. It's really fun. So that's what I do. Kayla's a little bit more of a kind of unique circumstance in that she's kind of in the same corner, but not really.
Yeah, I have my own firm and I have a contract with my city. So I take 3/4 of full public defense caseload. And then I can also have private clients. So I just do misdemeanors. So a lot of DUIs, assaults. I've dabbled in the felony world, but yeah, when I had less litigation experience, it was just really overwhelming and triggering and scary. And you guys, federal prosecutors. So you're always dealing with some pretty serious stuff, right? Am I right about that?
They're the more polished, like federal prosecutors are a different breed. I am so impressed.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a good thing or not. Yes, I left a couple of years ago, but yes, federal prosecutors. And no, first of all, you guys do incredible work. Thank you for the work that you do. We say it all the time, and we really believe it with our whole hearts that the justice system only works because there's vigorous advocacy on both sides. And the thing is, while we may talk about murders and whatnot, the bulk of people's experiences with the criminal justice system are exactly the types of cases that you handle. And I'd love to hear your perspective with that because unlike us, our client is the people, the state. It's very important. But you actually have someone you get to meet and talk to. And oftentimes the people that you're meeting, it's one of the worst days probably for them that they have to be in court, whether it's their first time or they have a long rap sheet. Doesn't matter. It's not great to be charged with something in court. And you guys not only have the, job of representing them legally, but oftentimes, at least in my experience, you are acting as therapist, as you can't be friend exactly, but there's so many roles that you fill. And that is a very special aspect of defense work. And I know you touch upon this in your podcast, but I'd love for people to kind of hear that aspect that we as prosecutors don't do because we don't really sit down with people and walk them through and the most sensitive times of their lives.
Yeah. Being in court with somebody who is going through it it's a really unique experience. I view it as a privilege that I have the skills and education and opportunity to help somebody through that. So I always take that attitude to it, that I'm really grateful that I get to be there. But it is hard. I think that the other parts of it that I think are hard that a lot of people don't get to see are the hard conversations that you have to have sometimes with clients when they're in custody and you're going out to a jail or a prison and you're having to go sit with somebody and you're having to tell them, hey, I don't know when you're getting out of jail. I don't know what this looks like for you. And just having to sit with people through really challenging parts of their life in a very raw way, whether it's people who are going through active withdrawal from substances or people who are concerned about losing their housing, potentially losing their custodial rights to their children because they'll be incarcerated for a long period of time. All of the different concerns that you're having to experience with the person as they're real-time processing it and it's their life. I think defense attorneys have a lot of vicarious trauma that I think doesn't get as much attention and sensitivity as it deserves, especially for clients who are indigent. People are already experiencing poverty and other things that are going on in their life. And it's really a muscle to be a good advocate for somebody who's going through all of those things, because at some point, the emotions that they're experiencing, they might take out on you. And so you have to have really thick skin to be a defense attorney, because not only do you go to court and you get yelled at by prosecutors and get yelled at by judges, you get screamed at by your clients on the phone, in jails, their families are calling you, your assistant sometimes is mad at you because they're the first buffer and people are calling them and wanting answers. All the while you're figuring out the mess that's going on with the pressure of, if I don't figure this out for you, you're looking at potential jail time or maybe probation or whatever it may be, or prison time, whatever it may be. Like I said, I try to go in with a really positive attitude of, I'm really appreciative that I get to do that. I mean, I'm living my dream professionally, but that doesn't take away from the fact that it's long hours. I mean, I sometimes leave work 2-3 hours after work because I have to go do jail runs. Sometimes, in the various different cases that I represent people in, I'll start my day in a hospital because I'm going and visiting clients that are in a hospital. So I have to bounce around from building to building to building to go talk to different people, different jails, different prisons, hospitals, different courthouses. That's a lot. So it's not only are you just exhausted interacting with these people, but your clients are very frustrated and you're the only person in their life that might have answers for them. And that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, really well said, Addie. I guess the way that I typically describe it is the highs are really high and the lows are really low. There is nothing like experiencing a not guilty verdict with your client right there and they're just so happy. It's just such a beautiful experience. But usually we lose as defense attorneys and it's tough. One thing I wanted to ask you guys about was, I guess, I have a couple questions. Number one, do you think that either of you would ever be criminal defense attorneys?
Ooh, good question.
So I think it would be fun for one of the reasons you said, the creativity. I think the creativity would be fun. I think coming up with ways to attack the government's case and alternative theories would be a lot of fun. You've also talked about all the reasons I would not want to be a defense attorney. Having seen defense attorneys just get screamed at by their clients and think, man, she is doing the very best for you. You need to just listen to her, and it just feels like you guys are on all the time. The one advantage to being a prosecutor is we control things a little bit more. It's not that often that we're at the jail at 8:00 at night, for instance. So those would be the downsides, but I do think it would be a lot of fun being able to be a little bit more creative and a little bit more sort of out there with the things that you're doing. So I think that would be fun. Now, will I ever do it? I don't know.
Yeah, in terms of I have zero moral opposition to it. In fact, we had an entire, I think, legal briefs episode defending the role of public defenders and defense attorneys in general. So in principle, absolutely. I do defense work. I've done a lot of defense work as well. I usually, when I get hired for criminal defense work, it is to prevent them being indicted in the first place. So I'm working more on the crisis management side, and the creativity is very fun, but the client management is a whole nother story. Like you said, the vicarious trauma is very real. And this kind of leads into the next thing that you guys have spoken about on your podcast and would love your perspective, which is, I know you guys probably face this question a lot, and it's an unfair question in the way it's framed because it's how people think very binarily. But people often say, how do you defend someone is guilty or that the evidence is overwhelming? And Kayla, you just said that you guys often lose, and it's because if you have good prosecutors, they have prosecutorial discretion and are only bringing strong cases. That's the hope, right? You're hoping both sides are working ethically. And the reason I say it's an unfair question is that's not the right question, because everyone, no matter how guilty they are, deserves, under the Constitution, vigorous advocacy. But that does raise the question of the types of ethics that you have to abide by when you face certain things like your client pushing for perhaps a theory that is unsupported by your research of the case, or if you understand, a lot of people ask this question, what if you know there could be potential perjury happening with witnesses or even with your client? Kind of bringing in all these mix of legal ethics issues that you guys have to face that is not unique to the practice of law, but I think you face it very head on every single day in your practice. So it's a very broad question. I'm just going to toss it to you because I bet everyone listening is thinking that. How do you balance that? How do you deal with that while recognizing that you are also bound by the same legal ethics rules that all attorneys are bound by?
Well, for me, I think that when I've had cases where, I go meet with my client, we go over the case in full. I think something that people don't understand is sometimes your role as a defense attorney is meeting with your client and explaining the state's case to a client. Like, you meet with your client and you're like, hey, I'm going to play prosecutor with you. And I'm going to tell you what the state's bringing. And I'm going to tell you how that's going to look. And I'm going to tell you how it's going to be conveyed. So you kind of really have to do this like Jekyll and Hyde with your clients sometimes, which is a lot of the behind the scenes work that I don't think people realize. Like, sometimes you're meeting with your clients and you're playing pseudo prosecutor, which is strange. And then, to your point about it being an unfair question, I hate the question of people asking how I can do what I do, because what I do is a right that everyone has. But also, just because somebody has bad evidence against them, just because somebody might be guilty, that doesn't mean that they don't have a right to go to trial. And so, we go over the case. If they want to go to trial at the end of the day, not my decision. And I always try to I view my job as me trying to just give people options, and me just trying to like put my client in a driver's seat of their life, give them some of that autonomy back, but help them through that to the point where you get to a sticky situation with your clients and maybe people they're wanting to call as witnesses. If, false evidence or false testimony or perjury becomes an issue, you have ethical obligations of things that if you don't know something is false and it gets presented to the court, that's a very different situation than if you're knowingly putting on false evidence. I think that's an important distinction. If you learn of something false afterwards, obviously there's ethical obligations that attorneys have to abide by fixing that. I've been to several defense trainings on this very sticky situation, particularly with defendants about if they want to testify and if you know that their testimony would be false, and how you kind of go about that. And, it's also, those are things you talk to your client about. So there's a lot of coaching you have to do with your client, but there's things that you can do with the court in terms of how you present that, because it's kind of a messy situation to forbid your client from testifying. That's a problem. Then there's a problem if you put your client on the stand and your client lies. So there's a way in which to ethically do that. Defense attorneys are always getting taught how to do that. I think that the more realistic squaring that happens, at least in my practice and in my experiences, oftentimes defendants don't testify. So that doesn't become an issue. I mean, as you know, they don't have to. And a lot of the defense case, unless it's a big case where there's a lot of witnesses, it's really the state's witnesses that you're just cross-examining more often than not, than you bringing your own witnesses in. So to the extent that concern ever really comes up in my practice, not really. But it is a situation that once you're in that situation, hopefully you've been trained on it vigorously before that happens to you. And then if you're in that situation, you need to figure yourself how to go about that with the court, because you could get yourself in hot water in terms of your licensure.
Okay, well, I would say we're all guilty, right? I feel like we're all people. We've all done bad things. We've all done things that we're ashamed of.
Kayla, I'm just going to give y'all a fair warning. She is the more bleeding heart defense attorney out of the two of us. So y'all are going to be getting a lecture.
I don't know about that, though, because I totally agree with you guys most of the time on your podcast. I think that people are guilty most of the time in these kinds of high profile cases. I think me and Addie kind of disagree there. We were just having a conversation about the Karen Reed case.
We disagree on that. Yeah, we disagree on that.
Yeah. Yeah. But to what you were saying earlier, Addie, the way that I handle that is I straight up tell my clients when they just want to word vomit their whole story to me is listen, you can tell me what you want to tell me, but I just want to tell you before you start that I cannot have you go on the stand and testify to something that I know is false. So I don't want you to come and tell me that like you did it and then try to demand that you go and testify that you didn't do it. So I just kind of give everybody warning up front.
We've talked about this before, is I would love to be a fly on the wall watching her interact with her client, because I'm sure that she just lays down the law with her client of like, hey, listen, when we talk about what your perception is of the case, you need to be careful about what you talk to me about, because that implicates what we can do with your case in terms of your testimony. And, defense attorneys, to the perspective of what Brett, you were saying and what Kayla was saying earlier about our ability to be creative, it's really throughout the entire course of representation that you get to be creative. How you talk to your client, you get to be creative about. How you go about your, courtroom persona, you get to be creative about. Kayla was mentioning your guys' deep dive on the Karen Reed trial. It was so interesting to hear your perspective on it from prosecutors instead of a defense attorney, because there were certain things that I loved about the trial that I think your presentation and perception of it was entirely different. Brett, you were commenting on how Alan Jackson was brought in to kind of be the like forceful cross-examiner. And as a defense attorney, he's very much not my style in terms of how I can be in a courtroom, but watching him be, his last thing he says to Proctor being, "Shame on you, sir," and walking back to counsel table.
Which is totally objectionable.
It gave me wings. I was like, oh my goodness, I love the flair. And, just certain things in terms of choices from the defense, I enjoyed it very much. And
well, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So one of the things about the Karen Reed case that we've seen that I think is emblematic of a lot of what we're seeing lately is the use by the defense of the press. I mean, because of social media and podcast and YouTube and everything else, there are so many more opportunities to get your story out in a place other than the courtroom. What do you guys think about that? What do you think sort of the ethical implications are of that? Do you, as public defenders, are you able to take advantage of that, or are there more restrictions on you because of where you are?
I don't really talk about cases of mine, and I think that there's certainly restrictions on that. To be honest, I just don't. I think it's very different when it's, the Karen Reed trial, very different circumstance, but I get so nervous talking about my cases at all. I certainly understand that part of the big benefit from my perspective of the Karen Reed trial is a huge part of our society, and people that are interested in her story and the case itself are seeing snippets of the courtroom and the defense in trial. And I think that there's a momentum behind that, especially since I think there's another battle to be faced with that trial going forward. I think, Brett, you mentioned some of the things that might become interesting for an appeal. So the public impression of that trial is very different. I think also, that's a case where there's so many things that are interesting about that the press might enjoy with her case. I mean, you have objectively pretty woman, you have somebody who is very much not what people think of when you think of murder. I mean, there's other cases like that, where it's not the typical character, but for me, I would feel uncomfortable with talking about a case like that. But, if you're a private defense attorney, you talk about the private defense attorneys that are on her case, different style. And they do handle very high profile cases. I mean, Alan Jackson handled, I think, a royal family's case. As recently, I was looking at his bio for high profile cases that he's worked on. And there's a blurb, I think, on his profile, or on his webpage, that has the most recent cases that he's handled. And I know that some defense attorneys market differently, especially if they're in private practice. You have to try to get clients to want to hire you. I get that. But for me, I don't have to go out of my way to get a client, because they just get given to me. So my work kind of speaks for itself in that way. I don't really feel like I have to market the outcomes that I get or cases I work on, because I'm working on cases every single day. I'm in court every single day. If you want to see what a public defender is doing, go to a courthouse. We're working on our cases, but it's a different market, right?
Addie, you're doing such a good job.
I had a question, because, we talked about the excitement of coming on the podcast, and, it seems as I appreciate how warm you've been to both Kayla and myself, because I think sometimes the dynamic of defense counsel and the prosecution can be tense. And I just was wondering, I mean, obviously we practice in different areas, but I think the federal system is also very, for lack of a better word, more buttoned up than the state court system. The state court system is very it is war.
Yeah.
Hell on earth.
It is scorched earth policy. We are wheeling and dealing and trialing, and we are just burning stuff to the ground. But in the federal system, and also just in your practice, I think as a new attorney, navigating the relationships with prosecutors, which can at times be pretty hostile. What's your experience on that? Because, these are people you have to see all the time. These are people that can reach a resolution. It saves you both a tremendous amount of time. And there are certain things that you will never agree on. And then you have to move on to the next case that you're working on with these people. You'll see them again. So in your experience with working with defense attorneys, what's that like from the other side? Like I said, most of my friends are defense attorneys, and I don't really talk to prosecutors about how much they like us or don't like us. And you can be honest.
Super good question, Addie. I'm so curious about that.
No, I think like in every other profession, just like there are prosecutors who are good and prosecutors who are less good, you really know who the good defense attorneys are. The ones who have strong moral compasses, who are really looking out for the interests of their client. And, it is wonderful because you build that friendship where you can trust each other in the sense of we both know that we are gearing towards the same thing. We want justice because we want to make sure that we are fairly charging and that they are bringing the best defense. And oftentimes when you have those good working relationships, it's the best outcome for the criminal defendant. And it's the best outcome for the case, right? You're not wildly filing a bunch of briefs that both sides have to respond to, which takes up both of your times when it's not actually advancing the cause for justice or for your client. And so when there's that mutual respect, I mean, I actually live next to like 3 or 4 defense attorneys that I regularly go to court with. We're in the same system, we see each other all the time. And obviously when we work on cases together, we keep it very professional. We don't talk about our cases. But like you said, you can't live, at least I can't live my life where I'm going to battle with everyone in life because the other person is clearly a human who has things going on in their lives that I don't know about. And they have been appointed a very important job, just like I've been appointed my job. And we all have roles to play. And at least for me, there will be times when someone will cross a line and it will be like, that's incredibly unprofessional. That's not a good thing to do. But for the most part, the ones that we see a lot, we kind of reach an area where things can get heated. I mean, things can get heated in writing and in court, but it's okay because we're doing it with those moral compasses. We respect each other and we leave the courtroom and we're able to continue looking forward either to the next case or making sure that those emotions don't get in the way of justice for the people or for that client.
Yeah, I think trust is so important. I think it's really important that prosecutors and defense attorneys all have integrity and can trust each other, and that if they tell each other something, they live up to it. Because if you have that, then you can work to what I think is going to be a just outcome for everybody. A lot of cases, as you guys were talking about, the evidence is there, particularly in federal court. I mean, it's even more, if we bring a charge, the expectation is we have overwhelming evidence. So oftentimes, and I wanted to ask you about this too, reaching a plea that everyone can agree to, that's just, and that the sentence isn't too harsh or isn't, too lenient, that fits the facts of the crime, I think is really important. And I have had the experience of a really great experience with lawyers, particularly public federal defenders or panel attorneys. Yeah. And the reason I say that, and the reason I like federal defenders, public defenders so much, is because number one, they are true believers. Like they're in it for the right reason. And I'm not just saying this because you guys are here. In it for the right reason. Do it because believe in justice, want to help their clients, want the best outcome for their clients. They're not doing it for fame. They're not doing it for fortune or anything like that. And I think because of that, it really can work the way I think the system's supposed to work. I don't think the system is supposed to be, we hate each other, we're stabbing each other in the back, we're doing a bunch of, all we care about is winning and all you care about is winning. no, there is something more important than that and bigger than that. And I think when both prosecutors and defense attorneys realize that, that's when you can reach the most just outcomes. And I think for both sides, it's a much better working environment. I would not want to be in a district or a jurisdiction where everybody hated each other and couldn't trust each other. I mean, you talk about a stressful existence.
I will say that my experience in state court, I mean, just a little bit about my practice. I work in Idaho. Idaho is the most incarcerated community in the world. We have the highest incarceration rate out of any of the states. As we all know, the U.S. leads the world in the democratic world for incarceration rates, and Idaho has the highest, which surprises a lot of people. The state court system seems really petty a lot of the time, which it's like we're fighting over maybe driving without privileges. And it's just stuff that we're fighting over. And that is exhausting. I have two very good friends of mine who are federal defenders, and their work, it seems that the relationship in federal court, first of all, most federal practitioners are in court a lot less, which I envy. So I think maybe that helps with some of the tension. But I agree. I think that there are prosecutors where certainly the cases become easier when we have that rapport and that ability to communicate. I really appreciate the prosecutors that I can just call and be like, hey, quick question, and then click. I don't have to send emails back and forth. But every so often, there's just times when you're a defense attorney where you do have to throw down and maybe not be what I want to do, but I have to do it for my clients. And, I appreciate your comments about public defense. It really means a lot to me personally. So thank you for that, Brett, because I think nationally public defenders are in a crisis. We need more of us. I think we do probably the most thankless job I can think of, but it is hard. And I think that people have this connotation that because we're so understaffed and overworked that we're just not good lawyers, or I'm going to get a real lawyer instead of it being a public defender. And I'm like, public defenders will throw down for you. They will work their tails off for you. And everybody
Amen.
I know who I do this job with absolutely wants to do it for why they want to do it. And I respect the hell out of it, but it's not easy. And I really appreciate you having us on here, because I think sometimes that relationship, people who are in this practice in the criminal legal world, but also people who are just interested in crime, don't understand that there's inherently a tension there. But to some extent, there's also a very tremendous amount of respect. My favorite judge is somebody who used to be a prosecutor. And we talk sometimes about when comments, in passing with judges, and he'll talk about when he used to be a prosecutor. And I appreciate that feedback because it's coming from somebody who used to do it, and I don't see it sometimes that way. And so I'm learning to kind of go into exploring, talking to prosecutors more just personally. Like I said, most of my friends are defense attorneys. No fault to y'all. It's just that we kind of were birds of a feather in law school. But yeah, I appreciate it. I think that having prosecutors that I can have really actual meaningful conversations with, where it doesn't feel like I'm just getting stonewalled, it gets a better outcome usually. And I think that's in everyone's best interest.
Listen, okay. So yeah, I am currently experiencing a very tough relationship with my opposing counsel. I don't know, you guys. I don't know what to do. I feel like the prosecutors that I seem to have a lot of trouble with are ones that maybe lack some real world experience, maybe, or have a hard time understanding our clients' precarious life situations and why it's so tough for them to, do what they got to do and come to court and do their classes or whatever. I don't know. I think that real world experience is important for a prosecutor to have, just like it's important for a defense attorney to have. You're in the trenches, you're working with people who have tough lives. And I think that understanding that is really important.
For me, I feel like, Alice, to your comment that you felt like was a backhanded compliment, I raise you. My dad told me that people who first meet me think I'm a golden retriever because I seem nice, but then they get to know me and they realize I'm a rescue pit bull. And I don't necessarily know what he meant by that, other than I try to be nice to people, but there comes a time where I really kind of have a little bit of I got to fight back mentality. And for me, the thing that I struggle with sometimes with opposing counsel is, to the extent that things get tense, I never want to start there. So if things have escalated to that point, it becomes personal for me in some regard. And I know that sometimes this job is not personal, but for me, it feels very personal.
So sorry to interrupt, but I feel like that goes back to what you guys were asking about earlier, which is like about working with clients, like personally. I feel like that's why we take it personally.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, the thing is like, to the extent where I feel like there's sometimes maybe passing comments about them realizing how overworked we are and stuff. It's like, I know that sometimes that's meant in good faith, but it always feels really crappy when you're the defense attorney and you don't get to determine whether or not a case is being prosecuted. And you're like, hey, like we have so many cases because of all the cases that are being prosecuted. And I don't really get to choose, I'm getting all of the case decisions that are about my workload are out of my hands. And so the commentary on my workload sometimes I don't love. Not that a lot of prosecutors do it, but I do think that that's like a common theme, particularly with public defense. But, to Kayla's point, just more plainly, some prosecutors just have, we all do. We are all very proud people, I think, as lawyers. That is something that not a lot of people like about us. But sometimes you get to court and prosecutors are just so polished and proud. And there are days where I'm like, I'm so mad. And maybe that's not fair, but it is something that, day after day, when you're working really hard as a defense attorney, sometimes those things just get to you, and we all have a job to do. But yeah, Kayla's point about arrogance, I wouldn't say that a lot of people that I work against are arrogant, but I do think that a lot of people I work against are stubborn, and it shows sometimes. And I am too.
Totally. Just the ones that I have a tough time with.
Yeah, I think this is such a wonderful example of having good conversation across the aisles and why it's so important to hear the other perspective, because it completely makes sense, the things that can come off as arrogance or actual arrogance and vice versa. But I thought that was a really good question, Brett. I think that was all geared towards you and definitely not me. So thank goodness that I don't struggle with arrogance whatsoever. I say that obviously in jest, but I know we're coming up on the hour here, and you guys have had a full, long day, and we are just delighted to have been able to meet you, to have you on, to hear your very, very valid. Thank you for being so real. Going back a little bit to something both of you said, we are not only huge advocates of public defenders and defenders, but we agree with you completely. We have seen way too many times in our jobs where criminal defendants think they need to go hire the most expensive attorney in place of perhaps the defender that they have been appointed by the court. And we see these families, sell off everything they have, put every last dime on the table for an attorney who may be a really good TV showboat, but it is those public defenders who know the court, know the judge, know the prosecutor, know these cases because you guys do them day in and day out. You have those massive docket lists of cases that you truly not only have the heart to want to fight for your client, but you have the expertise. And we will keep saying that just in case anyone is in that position where they think you have to pay, out the nose and sell off everything you own in order to have the best defense. No, you guys are seeing, two real civil servants, legal servants here who pour out their hearts. They don't do it for the fame. They don't do it for the work-life balance. They don't do it to get rich. And I think that's where we can really come together, both as prosecutors and defense attorneys, is these are really tough jobs where both sides are incredibly overworked, and there really is little separation between the professional and personal because you pour so much of your own, sweat, blood, and tears into it. So thank you guys for doing that on a daily basis. It is so wonderful to talk to people who are practicing what they're preaching every day. And I'm so glad that you're recording your after hours, debrief with each other to be able to kind of show people what it's like to do this work, this very important work that makes our judicial system go round. But with that, Brett, is there anything else you'd like to add before we sign off for the day?
Well, that was just all so nice. I feel like I should say something mean, but I don't have anything to say. No, look, we really liked having you guys on. I love this perspective. We'd love to have you on to talk about. I don't know how comfortable you feel talking about ongoing cases. I know there are certain ones you can't talk about, but if you ever want to come on and sort of give that defense perspective, I mean, hearing you talk about Jackson is interesting to me because it's hard for me to see it through that. Like, you see it through a different lens, and that's really great. And I know that our listeners will appreciate your perspective. So we'd love to have you guys on anytime. If there's ever any cases you want to come talk about, if there are ever any topics, like I have all these things I'd like to ask you, frankly. If there's ever any topics you want to talk about, don't be strangers. We hope you guys will come back, and we hope everybody who's listening will check out their podcast. They talk about a lot of the same things we do, and it's interesting from the defense perspective. So I think you guys will enjoy their perspective, and we really appreciate you guys coming on.
Dangerous to give us the invitation because I will absolutely take you up on it. So if there's something in the news that I want to come hop on, I will be reaching out to the both of you. So thank you so much for having us. I think Kayla said it earlier directly to you, Alice, but to the both of you, you were both just super impressive attorneys from what I gather from your podcast, and also just really nice people. And it's really nice to just have that realness to it as well. So thank you for being so welcoming to us. I would love to have you on our podcast. You can come if you want to bring a bourbon drink on Brett, you can show me up on my Frisky recipe. We can talk more serious whiskey. Kayla will be out on that. She knows nothing about whiskey, but you can come educate the podcast.
I'll drink whatever though. It's fine.
So thank you so much for having us. It was seriously a treat. I know that you both have had long work weeks, and the world runs because all of us work in the way that we need to. And I really appreciate it.
I love you guys. I love you guys so much. You have been in my ears for hundreds of hours.
She's fangirling. It's embarrassing, Kayla.
Anyways, I'm sorry.
Play cool.
I'll let you go to bed. I know. Be cool.
No. There's be cool is not how I live my life, so it's okay. Thank you both so much for listening to us, for reaching out, and for coming on today. And I'm sure it's not going to be the last time. But until next time, I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. You were just trolling us. It was really effective.
I wish I was.
You're going to have to come on the podcast.
We'll have Jason do the editing. We'll see what he comes up with. And we'll send you the audio, and feel free to release it on your stream as well.
Kayla, I'm going to tell Clark that it's so great that Clark should be grateful it's not him and that it's Jason instead, because our tech guy would be like, Kayla.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much. I hope you have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. That was so much fun.